Welcome to Gotta Run with Will. My name is Osbely Tala, and I go by Ozzie. I am going to be hosting today's show, and we are very, very grateful to have Marlon and having Maria joining us today.
Thank you.
How are you both doing today?
Well, thank you very much.
I'll start by saying how grateful I am to be invited to the show to host it once again and to have you without masks. It's just, I find it a really wonderful thing. I'll share with you a little bit about myself. I have two careers. The first one was on Wall Street, about almost 30 years in that. And then I switched to social work. I specialize in palliative care and I work at Elmhurst Hospital.
Elmhurst Hospital, which is in Queens, was one of the epicenters of coronavirus in New York City. It was the place that went viral.
I met Will through running. And so I started running. I started with the Galway team. And then I slowly graduated into running on my own. And I loved it so much that I injured myself. So I found it to be very liberating. And that's what also helped me switch careers, for which I'm very, very grateful. How about yourselves? Let's start with you, Marlon.
Yeah, so I first began running in 2010. I came to New York from Chicago and actually from graduate school. So I also have, past lives, both as a writer, performer, and then from that aspect, from that area, came into teaching. And then when I came to New York, I've been a public school special ed teacher for the last 14 years. Started running in 2010 as a promise to my family to be healthy, and then also as a side bet with friends, to lose weight, to run a marathon, or some of my friends wanted to maybe not necessarily run a marathon, but do a century ride.
So it was multifactorial for you. There was running had many purposes for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's
So
great.
within that season, I dropped about 55 pounds. Also started with the Galloway crew, both in Chicago and in New York.
Well, don't worry about losing those pounds because I found them. I'm carrying them now. So great. How about you, Maria?
I started running in 2011, right after college as well. I went to college in Massachusetts, and then I moved back here to New York, and then I found running through like one day, Thanksgiving. I remember I was at my grandmother's apartment not too far from here, and that we had like 3 generations in my grandmother's small apartment, and I just needed to get out. So I just went outside, I ran to Hunter College, and I ran back, and I was just like, wow, that was amazing. And then shortly after, I got hired at Paragon, so I worked there, and just everything just snowballed. I started running all the time. I met Kevin, and then we founded Queens Distance Runners, and now here I am, 10 years later, still here.
It's really amazing how running changes our lives.
Yeah.
Because in my case, I found it by chance. But one of the things that I found during the long runs is that at some point the body just keeps going, and your mind just can wander in any direction that one finds it. And that's how I keep thinking. So what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Until one day it just came to me during, I remember I was doing about 3 loops around Central Park. And on the last one, on that, on the hill, it just came to me. And by the time I came down on the west side, I just felt so relieved. I'm like,
Yeah.
I don't care that I'm so tired. I'm like, I got it. I know exactly what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
So that's great. What I wanted to now segue into, in terms of, how running helped all of us really move on to different things because it's so multifactorial. In 2020, we had such an extraordinary year and something that none of us ever imagined. We probably thought at the beginning was going to be bad, but never really how bad it got. And so I think that it might be very helpful to me as I learn to, cope with what happened. I think through stories, through sharing is really, especially in this informal way, it really helps me cope with the trauma of that we all went through. So in my case, I had friends visiting from Spain, and I was meeting them for the first time. And I remember they were here for New Year's Eve. So around that time, it was their first time in New York. So I felt that they were in New York, and so I had to navigate. So they were staying at the hotel, the Hilton Hotel, which is 54th and 6th Avenue, right around Times Square. So I'm like, they cannot be too close there. The streets are going to close on New Year's Eve, and so I was very concerned about that. At the same time, I read in the paper one small article that talked about, something going on in China, and I remember reading that and it caught my eye. And I think that, to age myself, it reminded me of the AIDS epidemic, of how it was a very small article buried somewhere in the New York Times. And back then I was 23 years old. But this time the impact came back and I'm like, what is that? And I just kept my eye on it. And so I enjoyed my friend's visit here in the States, and they were leaving. They were going back, I think, on the 3rd of January. But by then I was like, this is moving really fast over there. And I'm like, will they be able to get out? I never told them how concerned I was, but we went through the motions. And so that was kind of like when I realized then. And at the hospital, the effect that it had on me is I started wearing a mask in mid-January.
Wow.
And people, why are you doing that? Well, I'm like, I hear something is happening, but don't mind me, don't mind me. It's just how it changed me. And it reminded me also of, of course, now looking back at when the Challenger exploded, for example. I was in college and I was in the bookstore, and I remember seeing on TV, and I couldn't comprehend what was happening. The same thing as 9/11. I could hear it, but I couldn't understand. They kept saying the tower fell. I thought it was the antenna that fell. And I kept saying, but they could put it up. But I just wanted to tell you how it impacted me. So when was the first time you got a hint that something serious very serious, catastrophic was about to happen?
I heard about it on the news. I don't remember exactly where, but I heard about it, and then I was just like, oh, like maybe it's like another SARS or something, and it's not gonna come to the US. But then I heard from my aunt and uncle who are in Hong Kong, and they were telling my parents that things are really bad over here, like we have to wear masks and things are shutting down. And then all of a sudden, I think like sometime in February, like we all started to see how bad it was in China. So I think in February is when I started to feel like, oh my gosh, like this is getting really bad.
Like something is coming. That's what I
Yeah.
mean, but it was brewing, before we really got a sense of the West Coast,
Yeah.
which is where. How about you, Mom?
Yeah, a very similar experience. A lot of the rumors, and as a teacher, obviously, there's always a lot of talk and theories. Sometimes conspiracy theories that we readily dismiss when we hear it from students. But there were those rumblings. But it was pretty much operate as normal. I had plans to visit a really good friend of mine in Orlando, see the Star Wars exhibit, during midwinter recess. And I did, actually took the trip in the middle of February for the week, went to Kennedy Space Center, and had this idea that this, again, was brewing and that this was coming. But again, it was still like this abstraction, this existential idea that may have eventually work its way through, but with no idea in terms of its scope and its breadth.
How, through all the instructions, has the media started to really report more, especially on the West Coast, when they found the first case and the second, and whether it was where it came from? Did it change how you started to behave in any way, be it at work, be it with family?
Yes, certainly. I work at a public high school, but it's also an early college high school. I have co-teachers with PhDs who are epidemiologists. My oldest sister is a registered nurse in Chicago, and so in a similar fashion in which she was getting calls from family. I was also talking to colleagues, and who would say, this is my expertise. This is, I've seen things like this, and this may turn out to be much, much worse.
If you start wearing a mask?
I personally did not because I was not sick. There's that idea, especially in many countries outside the United States, where if you're sick, if you have the flu, if you have a cold, you generally put on a mask. You know, it's
Hold that
common
thought for a
courtesy.
second. I'll come back to that because you just
Yeah.
alluded to something that I think is really important. How about on your side? When did you really started to?
I mean, I normally carry hand sanitizer with me since before the pandemic, but I noticed that in my office, we have a person go around and clean everything, like everything that was touched. Every single time she cleaned, she would clean the whole office, and then I'd see her again 5 minutes later. All day, she would come by, just like cleaning all the door handles, cleaning the desks, like everything. And that's when I was like, oh my gosh,
So
like,
just from an observation perspective, you
yes.
said this is not a usual behavior. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
glad that they're dusting, but they're dusting a little too much, right?
Yes, but this was like end of February, beginning of March, and my office closed the middle of March, and we all started working from home the third week of March. So second week, like everybody started to like go home, and then the third week is when we started working from home.
Right. I think that what you're describing really, was reflected at the hospital in a way that one of the things that I started wearing a mask, right? And before the pandemic, there were boxes of gloves and masks, different types of masks, including 95, outside every patient's room in every single floor. So they were available, right? So at first, and one day I remember coming in from a Friday to a Monday, all those boxes were gone.
Wow.
Everyone that comes to visit are taking the masks. So
Yeah.
our behavior was reflecting with the community. So they were coming in and they're like, oh, let me help myself to masks. I think it's fascinating to me of how the reaction that all of us, each of us had towards the COVID-19. So I work at the hospital, caring for very, very chronically ill, terminally ill, or patients who are in the ICUs at the hospital. And once I started wearing the mask and we started seeing the numbers like 1 and 2 and then 4. And I'm like, okay, that's 100% increase versus, it's 4 and 4, but you're like, that's a lot in over 2 days. I remember making a decision of either you're going to have fear of it or you're going to respect it. And, I don't know what led me to think about that, but it's really how I thought about it. Because I think that there is a difference in what I have control over. But at home, I have my husband who I had to go there every day. So if I'm in so much fear, it was more about choosing one, either respect it or fear. Right away, we came up with what the plan was going to be. Specifically, I came home, but then he said, I'm going to do the same thing, which is, at the door, you take everything off, plastic bag there, and then you went directly to the shower, and then you came back and disinfected everything the same way that you said. And it wasn't until maybe about a month ago that we stopped doing that. That's how. And we sat down and we said, we are going to, other than going to work, I never stopped working. He at some point, like everybody else, stopped working, but we self-quarantined. We really didn't go absolutely anywhere. And so fear versus respect. How did you manage it?
Well, literally the third week of March, I got COVID, so I couldn't really go anywhere. So I was quarantining at home. And talking about fear versus respecting it, I wasn't so much afraid of the disease. I guess I respected it in the sense that, this will be over in 2 weeks and then I can, rebuild my strength, and still follow the guidelines and disinfect and everything. But we didn't go anywhere during those 2 weeks. And I had a lot of FaceTime calls with my parents because they were worried. But yeah, I mean, I didn't really feel scared about it.
There's a
That makes
deeply
sense.
rooted feeling from what you're describing that there was
Yeah.
optimism.
Yeah.
When you say, when you give it a period to
Yeah.
something, right? It's like there was that kind of like a underlying something that makes one say that. So I think that, that's a great way that you cope with it, especially when you turn any media or you read absolutely anything. Nothing was getting better,
Yeah.
and to have
Right.
optimism in, in the middle of something that was so unknown to everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about you?
Yeah. Very similarly, I think my family, myself, my colleagues, and my friends had a deep, deep, deep respect for this, and identifying that this could end up being really, really bad, to the point where when schools did close in that third week of March, we had been debating with friends and calling for a closure of schools earlier. I actually contracted the coronavirus towards the end of March. So within 7 days of schools closing, I started feeling the initial symptoms, and then um, went to City MD on April 4th, and already by then had an idea that this is more than likely COVID. So I actually packed my bag, a charger for my cell phone, water, change of clothes, and when I went to City MD, it was to see if I would need to be taken to the hospital, and I did. So I went from the City MD in Elmhurst to Elmhurst Hospital on April 4th. So by then had been around for quite some time, and so were the calls to have the city and its functions on lockdown earlier.
I don't know how each of you felt or feels now, but one of the things that I can share with you, having worked at the hospital and taken care of with really thousands of patients with COVID, is that no one ever regretted however they contracted it. It was just fascinating that I thought that they would say, well, I didn't take care of myself, and then I was doing all these things, and can you believe that I did that? I never did hear that. To me, it's a fascinating thing because, again, it's how one reacted to what was coming, right? But I never heard that. So I don't know how you feel, and I don't know if you want to share how you feel about it, but you should know that I never heard that.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to me. Did it change any relationships, either with friends or family? With me, I can tell you that it changed with my family because I have my niece lives right around the corner from me, and she would see me on the street. Oh, uncle, we're very affectionate towards each other, and I would like stay on that side of the street. You're not going to come near me, and I would just walk away. And they felt that I was just being, exaggerating, like I was being cold, and you can just imagine all that. And for me, it's like, no, no, no. I'm coming from the hospital. The last thing I went to, and it affected our relationship to the point that we're rebuilding the relationship now, and really going back and talking about all these things for the first time.
In my family, we don't really hug or show that kind of physical affection, so it wasn't that bizarre for us. But for my husband's family, he's Ecuadorian American, so they are very affectionate. But his mom understood, and she was very like don't touch me. I'm not gonna touch you. Like we need to wash our hands. Like she was very good about it. I'd say like it didn't really change much in my family.
So it's fascinating, how where culture really comes into play
Yeah.
in that it was not unusual. So for us, it was like, oh, he's so cold. Everything that it's like you're closing the door on us.
Yeah.
No, certainly. Yeah, Filipino American, we're expressive, we're huggers, we pride ourselves in showing that type of affection. It was very, very strange, not only not having that type of physical contact. Yeah, again, my experience is much different than many others. It was a very, very traumatizing event to go through. It's 48 hours in the Elmhurst Hospital ER, where it looked like it was at 2-3 times its capacity. There were doctors from all over the country, all over the world at some point, and then being witness to teleconferences, and phone calls made between patients and their family members.
It went to a complete informal world, right? It's like a remote world, I should
Yes.
say.
Oh, absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah. And it was some of the most harrowing moments that I've had and I've witnessed. And it also shows, how far we've come in terms of technology, and unfortunately, I was witness to several final phone calls or video conferences between patients and their loved ones or family member, and trying to tell that to others, both as a form of healing and working through that experience, but also, as a cautionary tale,
There were some things for me that, we all hear them, we all hear the definition, the word, but it wasn't until I was actually experiencing it that it really like created my own definition, where you remember what the dictionary says and you're training in school and all that, but compassion.
Yeah.
I have always been aware of like I have biases. Like people push buttons and you're like, like the looks that I give and all that. And I'm like, always aware of like, okay, that's your bias, put it aside. And then I have learned to cope with the fact that I think bias is, at least for me, is a strength in the sense that I become aware that it's a negative thing in me. But unless my behavior changes to affect someone, it remains my bias. In other words, it remains inside this body, right? And one of the things is that I found is that families have different reactions to what's happening. How come you don't let us see my loved one, for example? So that bias of how they treated many of us at first when we just couldn't do anything. So that describing the protection, and really stepping back and say, this is why we're doing it. So the creativity that the hospital, and it wasn't just our hospital, really everyone thought of creativity is how can we really allow someone who cannot see each other, hear each other.
Right.
And through the work that I do, I feel that it's kind of like what we're doing right now. There's like the green background, and here, let's say we are interacting, and similar to what you were describing, I attended on families' behalf so that they could experience like many deaths. Where you stay there, and I found that I had never really experienced compartmentalizing myself in a situation, but I found that in order for me to go literally from bed to bed, sometimes doing it like that multiple times in an hour, never mind a day, I had to disconnect myself. So it wasn't a disconnecting that I didn't care. It was I had to compartmentalize it.
Yeah.
Like you cannot, in order for you to continue to do what you're doing, you need to be more objective about it. And fortunately, we advocated for the technology, and I was not anyone to use, I'm on Facebook and I'm on WhatsApp, but I was never like a very heavy user of it. And all of a sudden, like, okay, this is it. And then we had the interpreter on one, the WhatsApp on the other one, and then, and anywhere in the world. And it reminded me of, had this been 20 years ago, none of that would have been possible. So there was technology in that way really, really helped. And that segues into the following question that I had, because I'm always interested in, as a person, I tend to be a loner. I love to be among people, but I'm okay if I'm spending time by myself. And I think running is something that we share in that when you go for those long runs, whether you're in a group or you're by yourself in to a large extent, because I don't remember doing that much chatting when you're doing an 18 mile or 20 mile run.
Right.
At least I didn't have the energy to do any chat. But did you develop or strengthen any skills or found having any skills doing, because now all of a sudden we had all this time, right?
Yeah, I think I went back to basics in many, many sense. I started running with the Galloway crew, and that run walk method that leaves a lot of time, not just for recovery, right, but also many opportunities to reset. And one of those things in resetting is doing a body scan and doing a body check before returning to your run. And in that process, for me, mentally, are this idea of mantras, so It doesn't have to be a quote or a motto. It could just be a name, someone that you connect with, a friend, family member, or a stranger, just wishing positive energy towards that person and removing that ego in a very personal experience, right? And that idea of doing that as you are also engaging in a social activity, if you're running with friends, or being part of a larger movement of runners worldwide. Many, many people have come before us and many after us. Yeah. So it did give me a greater sense of connection, which I couldn't have in the physical, but mentally I could go through those checks in that those basics.
Do you feel
those
there's a
mantras.
skill that can help you now or in what you do now in a different way?
Absolutely. As a teacher, and especially as a special education teacher, I'm always trying to study the student. Like my primary job, not only with understanding the content and how to scaffold the information, but also to study the student. How does the student operate, not only academically, but socially, physically, emotionally, and build in those routines, build in that idea of a growth mindset, for example, versus a deficit model, a negative versus an optimistic view. And that was something that I'd always talked and sometimes ran with that mantra, and sometimes walk with that mantra. And for the most part, I hope that I taught under that.
I
But
love the idea
this
of mantra,
really,
because
yeah,
it's a really simple thing, and you
absolutely.
I have my mantra and it was interesting when Ryan Hall won the marathon trials here in New York City.
Yes,
We were
2000.
there. I was there at that finish. We saw it all. Anyway, afterwards, somebody asked him, and he said he had a mantra, and it's ironic. It's the same one that I have. They that wait upon the Lord. That one. It really is. You should mount up on wings as eagles, and that's the way you feel. And then you shall run and not be weary. You shall walk and not faint.
Wow, that's wonderful.
in terms of skills, and did it?
I mean, I don't know specifically if I did, but I have been cooking a lot more at home since I have more time now.
So that's
I mean, I love that you focused on the connection. Even though you were alone, you could find that connection with other runners. I'm also a loner, I guess you can call us that. I'm very introverted and very observant. And before I started running, I actually started with yoga. So I'm very familiar with getting a gauge of how I feel first before.
your mindfulness,
Yeah.
right? That's which is mantra,
Yes, yes.
yoga.
So I also found a lot more time for that and strengthening muscles that I maybe never had a chance to, before the pandemic, where I had to rush to work, rush to a run, So
But it's cooking, that's great. Karen must have been like,
yeah.
No, it's funny because one of the affinity clubs that I advise at my high school is a Filipino culture club, and they usually do the dances in person, and we have education sessions about Filipino culture and the diaspora, and they're involved in other activities as well in other groups. But one of the things when we started meeting virtually, it's like, okay, you can't do dances, you can't, construct the dances themselves. What can we do? And I was like, oh, we should talk about where the dances came from. And we can't get together to eat, but do a demo on cooking. One of the things that we actually produced at the end of the year, we're still producing it, I'll have to go into the summer, is a cookbook. A cookbook of all the different recipes from all the different families, not just Filipinos, but that entire community. So yeah, absolutely. There was a lot of cooking that certainly happened, and a lot of ways that people try to retain that connection and retain that that affinity with groups.
I could say my culture, but it's like the culture within my family. You can be from any culture, but there's a culture within the family. So it's always about cleaning and listening to music loudly, right? And in my case, usually sappy, sad, romantic songs. Right? So one of the things that I found myself doing is cleaning the house. So there was always something being cleaning. So Brian would be like, "What are you doing?" "Whatever you do, put your headsets on. I cannot listen to that music anymore." So the house hasn't been as clean as in a long time as it is now. And I wanted to talk about a habit that you may want to like get rid of, that you might have developed. For me, I cannot see any piece of clothing for laundry. I'm like, if there's laundry, if there's something, oh, I have to collect more because there was a load to be done. So I find myself doing laundry many, many times. So that's one of the things that Brian will say. There's one piece of laundry to be done. You don't need to do it. So I found out, okay, I don't need to do that. I'm going to wait a day or two. But I found myself, there was always something to do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, for me, teaching remotely, for better, for worse, my computer desktop, which is normally, used for programming, side projects and playing video games, that became my main work computer. And then I had an additional monitor as well. And so I love the skills and being able to have so many windows open, being able to work from home. But it also made certain routines, you fall into some of those more negative routines. Like, I was very sedentary, easily distracted. The same way that I try to instill this with the students is take things in short, small, manageable chunks. I had my own timing clock, kind of like an egg timer that I use for my tasks. And I would find myself running overtime in those extra minutes that I would reward myself after doing a block of work for 20, 25 minutes. And having those distractions a little too close to me, yeah, I thought that was a particular habit.
With this story that you shared about cooking, I feel very lucky that Brian is also, likes to cook. And the way I say it, it's easy to say he's the best cook in the world, but the way I say it is more like he knows how to cook for me because I really love everything that he cooks. But I remember he would say, "I'm going to make egg steak, but I'm looking for vanilla." He would be looking for vanilla. So I'm like, "Brian, there's vanilla in there." He's like, "No, but it's Madagascar for vanilla from." I'm like, so it's like, so there was a fine tuning of a skill that he liked, but he really I'm like, now I'm like, oh, now I can tell the difference between Wong and vanilla. Before I was like, vanilla is vanilla, right? Now I know the difference. From a gratefulness perspective, because the fact that we're here, because we're grateful to be here. What is one thing that you're grateful for now that, fortunately you went through COVID and here you are? So gratefulness, that's what I'm saying. There's a lot of cliche, like I'm grateful for this. I had a lot of compassion, but it's a very cliche way of saying it. But at the most basic level, what would you be grateful for?
I would say I'm grateful for my relationships with Kevin and my family. I feel like it's strengthened during the past year. And also having the experience of living in the South and also in the North, to be able to understand, all the changes that we went through last year and the turmoil.
Yeah, certainly. One of those mantras that I had from way back when I started running, a couple years into it, was this idea of running for joy, and running with that idea of gratitude, evoking people and ideas, positive ideas, as part of that running process, almost as part of that breath, really came back. I think that it was an actual mantra for me in 2013. I had known Joy Johnson, peripherally in the Galloway bus before going to the New York City Marathon. I was inspired by her, and I remember when she passed shortly after her 25th running of the New York City Marathon, the day after.
A fall. She had a fall. I remember.
Yeah, she had a fall. Yeah. It deeply affected me in the sense that she had always run with that compassion and that gratitude.
I want to expand on that a little bit because and this is what I mean by compassion and the bias and the compassion, because someone could say, well, who should be running at 87 years old?
They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint. Isaiah 40:31.
Right, and many people are like, what were you doing out there? Well, now that you have X situation medically, why would you be doing that? And why is he doing that? And I keep telling my loved ones, stop doing. And what I have learned through my work is that I usually ask, so how was he or how did she live her life before that?
Mhm.
And they describe someone who was stubborn, someone who was independent, all the other stuff. So I say to them, your loved one has lived and continues to live life the way they have always lived it.
Yeah.
Now you just want to protect them more, but that is their life.
Yeah.
And it just helps them to think that that's right. I have to continue supporting how he or she wants to live. And it may be through the end of life.
What does joy get out of the run?
Over the years, I guess reporters found my story interesting. It was always the same question, always the same answer, too.
How long do you think you'll keep running?
Until I die. That's what I'm planning on.
Illness really, I've learned that it doesn't really change our personality. It limits what we do, but it doesn't change the personality. We changed our behaviors with them. I'll never forget one patient. She was 94, and I was coming to assist her. Hello, it's that whole process of can you hear me? And they're like, I may be dying, but I'm not deaf. I remember her saying that. It was just such a wake-up moment that I had my bias. I'm like, you must be all, you cannot be hearing me.
Yeah.
And she was just so sharp. I may be dying, but I'm not deaf. So it was such a great way of always, and I never forgot her telling me that.
Yeah, if there is something to be grateful for in surviving this whole pandemic, it does bring to light, that nature, that and we're all Queens folk here, and I'm in Woodside. You're both in Jackson Heights, and we were there experiencing it in the thick of it.
I must share with you something that is happening now to me as I sit here, which is very cathartic. I feel like this out of body experience in the sense that as we're sharing all this, it's like a full circle, right?
Yeah.
So we have never met, but we all are here through some running connection. And it reminds me of that conversation that we all have when we do a marathon and it's mile 24 and we are tired and we are making all this negotiating, right? We can do it just to that line, that next 2 blocks. It's that dialogue that we all have, and it's the dialogue that we're talking about now. And it just reminds me that activity is so deeply rooted in me now that even though I'm not running now, I was not aware as to how deeply continues to really drive how I am as a person, in the sense that Brian and I really strengthen our relationship by really discussing some things that were important, because at some point one of us wanted to do something outside, and I'm like, let's discuss that. How are we going to do that? So let's say you go and do that. How I know how safe you are going to be. How do you think the other individuals that you're going to be are going to be safe? And in our case, we talked a lot about AIDS, for example, because being safe is one thing, but you can protect yourself, but how do you know somebody else is protecting themselves? So it's that whole history. And, sometimes it ended up being that, okay, let me think about it. And individually, we made our decisions where we went out or not.
Right.
I just chose not to. But there were times where, no, I'm staying. But I'm like, don't do it because of me. Do it because of what we are talking about. And the idea was to really, how do we keep each other safe? And at some point, in the middle of it, it was almost like we didn't have any choice, right? We were all in lockdown.
Right.
But as it started to open up, it became more of the safety issue for us, and it became really a loving thing because it's not that we did not want to do something or that either one stopped the other one from doing it, but it was almost that we love each other that much. At least we've made it this far. It's really that, how we talked about it, just a little longer, and that's great. So going forward, how do you think is the situation going to really develop in the sense that, at the hospital, as I might have mentioned, there's a high number of healthcare providers that still don't want to vaccinate themselves. It's a very complex situation. There are the conspiracy theories, there are individuals that they're going to put some tracking devices in you. And we had the anti-vaccinators before, for children.
Yeah.
And we haven't even gotten to children yet, in terms of the vaccines, the small children. Every time I speak with someone, I always try to find out if there is something that is practical that is stopping them from doing it. At the hospital, there was one person who said, no, I don't want it. And this is someone who is elderly. And I said, so if there's anything that I can do to help you, even if it means me going with you, would you go with me? And it ended up that she was just so afraid of going by herself. Here I am, you could think that, for a number of reasons, but no one has said, I'll go with you.
Right.
And it was just, that simple. And I wonder, what are other ideas do you think, you can share? Because I think that it's more an exchange of ideas that we can put into our arsenal as we speak with individuals who have not vaccinated themselves.
What I've noticed is that there's a number of many different tactics. Like in our neighborhoods, for example, there are pop-up vaccination sites, the same way there were pop-up COVID testing. We also had this confluence of different events happening politically with mayoral race and the district races. And I think one positive outcome from that process is the education campaign that's come from that as well. And as we move towards being out and about it again and combining that with getting out the vote, part of that has been many of the candidates and political figures have advocated for that on a larger scale, and along with other community members, and tying that with the different communities, whether they're local church or school communities.
In Jackson Heights, I thought it was brilliant, thinking creatively. You come out of the subway, and then there are the endless, glorious taco stands.
Right.
Which one do you want? It's not like, do you want a taco? It's like, what country, what time do you want? And all of a sudden now the vaccination trucks are all lined up. I mean, how brilliant is that?
Gerald Ferrozo is hopping on this mobile vaccine unit to get his second shot.
Very practical and easy. You can just walk up and get your vaccine.
The vaccine van parked right outside Blink Fitness, bringing that convenience not just to gym members, but any passerbys.
And it's like, it's right there. So I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, people need a nudge. It's just that those little nudges. We have those things in ourselves, like sometimes to trick ourselves into getting up and doing some sort of physical activity, which at the time, at 4:45 in the morning, I don't know if I can. I don't think I'm gonna keep hitting that snooze bar, but
Right.
A lot of times it is just those little things that make it just a tad easier. Laying out your clothes the night before, eliminating any possible excuse or circumstance that could lead to an excuse of why you don't run or find a way to be active, because we've all had that experience, and we say it all the time, it's just like you never regret going for a run, you always regret not.
Right. This is one of the reasons why I'm like very close to going back to the gym, Blink on 78th Street.
Yeah.
Very close there because, no one is wearing a mask there. And then you just have to accept that.
Yeah.
And part of me is, to your point of laying it out, I'm like, I cannot go home, change at home, and come back, even though just a few blocks, that just doesn't work.
Yeah.
You go there, I'm just gonna get something to drink, let me check something. Before you know it, you're just done for the day. It's like I work at the hospital, you walk one block and there you go. So that's how I do it.
No, when I started getting back into running, I didn't even start with the run walk. I just started with the walk. because I didn't pack on the COVID-19 as it were. It was more like a COVID-25. I said to myself, I'm going to get back into running. The weather's starting to get better. I started walking. I would walk from, across Queens Boulevard, past the 61st Woodside, stop all the way up to 34th Ave and walk those streets that had blocked off from 8 to 8. And I started doing that every day.
34th Avenue was very frustrating for me because I felt that the length of two blocks, I felt like I worked 10 blocks because at first some people were wearing the mask, so the weaving of I'm like, I cannot do the 34th Avenue, so I would go on Northern Boulevard and go up to the bridge and come back, and I always regretted not going over the bridge, but it just took always too long to go over. And Ryan was like, "Where have you been?" And I was like, "I'm like, okay, so like 2 hours." So it's really fascinating how I think that it has affected and touched us in so many ways. And it makes me wonder what's going to happen in the fall.
Yeah.
We don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know, right? Exactly.
We don't know. I mean, we're making plans in place in the schools, in public, and in different businesses insofar as what the requirements are right now. We don't know what they'll look like in the fall. I'm registered for Chicago. I'm registered for the New York City Marathon. I'm excited to run both. I think they'll be okay. I think it'll be all right. But making plans in the hopes of that, that little bit of normalcy. I think we are making that forward progress.
It's a very individual thing. I have done some gardening also. The co-ops where I live have this block long middle of the block gardens. So I do that a lot, but I do want to get back to some level, whether it be blink or running, but it's that level of normalcy that even when I've been gardening, I've been wearing double masks. So it's like, am I sweating because I'm gardening? Or am I sweating because I have a mask? So it's been really fascinating to me. And so now I'm like, yesterday I decided, no more masks. And it's just that level of comfort, it's okay. And one of the, questions that I also keep asking myself is that, we're still in the conversation about there are some people that haven't even gotten their first vaccination.
Right.
I got my second vaccination the first or second day in January. So I'm like, okay, when are they going to start giving the booster? Because I'm going to be like the first one getting this. I don't hear much about that, even though I'm sure I'll come up with something. Yeah. With the hope that many people, even if one person watches the show, right? That would be 5 of us, right? 3 of us, or 1 to 2 people watch the show. What are tips that we can share to individuals who we may encounter, we will encounter that may say, I don't want the vaccination?
As me, myself, I would wonder why. And I mean, I would pose the question like, what is your reasoning for not getting a vaccination? And it can't be, like, oh, I think they're gonna shoot a, microchip in me or something. But I need like a concrete reason, like, is it because you're uncomfortable with the needle, or I just really want to understand.
Again, I would say that it is a personal, very, very personal decision, and we can argue the science with it, but I think again from that personal viewpoint is who does it benefit to get the shot, to get the vaccine versus the negative effects of me. Sometimes it is very much, after 18 months of this, being very isolated and responding in a very individual sense.
Right. I find that level of education plays a role, but in terms of, 1 to 100%, I don't think it's a high percentage. Because I just think it's a very personal thing that's very complex. I love the idea of really listening to what may be preventing them from not going through. Because like you said, it's like, it could be something very simple. And one of the things that I will continue to try is where they get their information. Because I think that's very, very important. Because if they're there's a difference, I think, between not interacting with many people, spending time by yourself, but the people that you spend time with and how you get your information can be very influential. Like one of the things that for heart disease among the Black population, for example, there's the doctors, there's the pamphlets, there's, all the, but one of the things that they have identified that really helps is identifying where it is that they, where Black people congregate in a way that they share absolutely everything, camaraderie, and it's barbershops.
Mhm.
So they have trained the barbers and some barbers to talk about, heart disease, and in that process they have engaged a lot more people because they sit around and it's coming from where they get their information and they're trusting it. So it's thinking that out of the box. There's one book that's called Switch,
Oh yeah, yeah.
which is really, really great, which is really looking at the same thing, but thinking of it from a different perspective, using the barbershop to disseminate information in a way that everyone goes there to get information, of all ages, children and adults. I just think it's great.
Yeah. That makes me think of the past year, my mom would sometimes share information that she got from WeChat, and she would tell me, and I would be like, Mom, that's not real, right? Like what they're saying is not proven. And she's like, well, why would they post it? I was like, well, that's a question you should ask yourself. Like, why would they try to spread that? And so I've gotten my mom to really look at the information that she's getting from WeChat and stuff, and we do discuss it over our weekly Sunday dinners. So I think to that point, like the barber shops, like I kind of found that the Sunday dinners was a time to kind of quash those conspiracies and be like, Mom, you really have to think about why this information is being spread this way and why they think that people like you would believe this.
What I find really encouraging, and for anyone who watches it, is that it's a compassion, right? You're not saying you should and you're doing it wrong. You're just saying, think about it this way. Think about it in a different way. It's just an invitation to, first, I'm glad that you're reading somewhere. I'm glad you're connecting, all those things. But then you're just doing it in a really loving, compassionate way. Can we take that drive to learn about it and question it just a little bit, and then come up with either I'll continue to think about that or I'm going to change my mind about it. So I really like that. Definitely going to use everything that we have shared here because it's so complex. It's so complex.
Yeah.
I have also heard people that feel guilty about the fact that their children haven't received it yet. So why should I get it if they haven't? When they do, then I will. The one thing that I also wanted to address is how differently I feel it has affected men and women, the pandemic, because first it sounds, everyone's going back home. Okay, lockdown. But then I'm like, so who's taking care of the children while the person who's taking care of the children are at home and working? And then, and then now we know through statistics that many women left the labor force. And being aware of the privilege of just being a male, the fact that now such a large group of women have left the labor force, for them to be rehired, it is very complex, and I don't take that. I struggle with it. I struggle with it at work, and I struggle thinking about it. What if it was me? How, I think part of me will feel so angry, because I have friends who, would be home and they would be like, yeah, so what are you doing? Well, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. So where are your wife? And I always heard on a ratio, not always 100%, but that women were doing much more of the chores at home by default. And I just think that's going to be something that will need to be addressed and expanded on. And I think all of us, in terms of listening, I think that part has to come into our conversation about, because even with my family, my nephews and nieces, I bring it up. So how's the labor, the home labor divided here? So, just bring it up as in like, I'm aware that it's not even. And just planting that seed, I think that it just may trigger a conversation. Maybe I can do a little something more. And sometimes it can trigger the other way. So those inequalities, I think, have been magnified through the process.
Yeah, definitely. And in teaching, you see that in the homes. There's food insecurity. There are students and families who do not have homes, and so that family members who have lost their jobs had difficulties finding work, where a technology gap is the least of the problems in many households. So it has brought to light many of those inequities.
Depending on what it is that I'm doing, I find myself that it's not a generosity thing. I just think it's a fairness thing. Because if you go, let's say you happen to be lucky enough to go buy something at Tiffany's, you never question what the tax is, you never question anything. Or if you go to a fancy restaurant in the city, there's never a question as to what the tip is going to be. It's like it's expected, right? So in our neighborhood, I'm like, okay, I'm going to make believe that I'm going to, the Bernardin, even though I'm buying a taco. So it's like, sometimes they're like, here's your change. I'm like, no, thank you for being here. Thank you for being back.
Yeah.
It's kind of like my very small way of sharing wealth in a way. And with everything that our neighborhood did, which has been really, really great.
Yeah.
And the creativity that can be, the one point that came to mind before when we were talking about how the helping those that are not vaccinated, the lotteries that they're doing. I think the winning pot is too high. I think if they said $10,000 lottery, we're going to have 10 lotteries a month. I think more people will play the lottery in that way to get vaccinated, because there's a real probability that you will know someone that actually won the money.
Yeah.
Versus $10 million, and one person's going to get it. You never meet that person. So I just think that they should lower that amount.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I just think that I'll be like, $10,000. I can use $10,000. And if there are 10 of them, there's a high probability that I can get it.
Oh yeah, any denomination.
I mean, the Budweiser, I thought it was fun too, but I'm like, okay, there are a lot of people who don't drink.
Yeah.
So what about a pair of shoes, running shoes? I think all the runners would be like, yes, me.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was talking to my coach, the Adobo Running Club, who I haven't run with in years, but we've had Zoom calls and like over the last couple of years. But yeah, in terms of coming back into running, it is all the different ways that we can use running and larger running events to give back to the community. I've always
speaking about that. There are groups. It's more my ignorance about it. For individuals who want to run but cannot buy the equipment that's needed, like a good pair of shoes, as we all know, it's like such a basic thing to get. Everyone can buy a pair of sneakers, but are there individuals that want to run and don't have that?
I don't know of particular running organizations. I mean, there are certainly shoe companies and movements that donate shoes.
I remember when I stopped running, I had all this running, and Will has been a witness of, like, before I used to be like, what's the latest technology? The mesh, this and that, and I used to buy all this stuff. And after I stopped running, I had all this clothing that was in perfect condition. But I also thought of going to Central Park and line it up. How at the Runners Club sometimes people leave the books.
Yeah.
But I'm like, how am I going to tell them free? And it's like, will people have been comfortable saying, okay, I'll take this or I'll take that? I'm like, nah. So I did eventually found someone.
Yeah. And I think coming back into into running and into the larger events, also the charity running, right, has come back, and what I'm seeing is a lot of the charity running opportunities are continuing the rollovers from all of the canceled events in 2020, but I think moving forward in especially everything that's happened within the last year is that there could be more of that movement towards supporting more community-based organizations, whether they be Black organizations or Latinx organizations, or especially in the last couple of months with everything happening in the Asian American AAPI community as well.
As we close our show, I'm just really pleasantly surprised that after everything that we have gone through and are going through, we hear the word resiliency and, how we just come back and bounce back. But we went through so much, and here we are, to hear your optimism, to hear we are coming back, and everyone. It's just such a wonderful thing to remember, because on the dark moments, and we all experience them, and from time to time, it's like it's mile 24. We can still make it. We've been here before, and just like running, somebody always encourages you. You can do it, or if nobody's talking to you, I'm going to follow this person a few steps, and then then maybe I'm not as fast. I'll follow this person instead, or I caught up to this person. I think I can catch up to the next one.
Right.
At least that's how I used to do it. So
It's the same in Zwift, right? When I was doing cycling virtually, if you're not doing a particular plan, there's always these movements like catch up to this person, catch up to this person.
But instilling in someone, an activity like that, I think it's a coping skill that can be used in any, sometimes we have difficult jobs. Like, how am I going to get through this week or this month? And it's like, no, we've been there before. Let's just remember that. And so thank you so much for joining me in a conversation that I'm sure will continue for a very long time. And I hope to run with each of you someday.
We'll see you in the neighborhood.
Yes, no, absolutely. You'll see. You'll be like, okay, that's Ozzie. 3 blocks behind us. We got to leave. But I'll be just as happy to be out there with you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We'll be there in the miles along the way. It doesn't have
so
to
if not
be
running, we can go marathon eating. And, there's all kinds of things that
or it starts with just putting one foot in front of the other.
Definitely.
And
that's great. That's great.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, everyone.